When I was young, my mum and dad said, what do you want to do? And I wanted to be a zookeeper. I think right from the start, I just like getting outdoors. We're about to get a cat to attack us. This is Coco Chanel. My poor wife. My wife really got me to yoga. She thought it might calm me down. So I'm doing my yoga trainer's exams next year. So I was like, for God's sake, this was meant to calm you down. So he rang me up. And again, probably looking back with staggering naivety, he said, come and run this mountain equipment brand for me. And I said, yeah, I can do that. I got no fucking idea. How do you run a brand? I think any success is a mix of a lot of different things. Go on, Coco. Don't forget, you're so much more than just flogging shit.
Welcome to Sports and Outdoor Mentors. In this episode, I chat to Andrew Denton, the CEO of the Outdoor Industries Association. Andrew has spent almost 40 years working in the sports and the outdoor industry for brands like Rohan, Ron Hill, and Mountain Equipment. As an employee, a leader, and ultimately an owner. We chat about his early career in sales, owning and selling mountain equipment, and his obsessive nature, plus much, much more. But before we get into this episode, I have one favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe button. This helps us to continue grow the channel, elevate the content, and bring you more insights from other amazing leaders from the sports and outdoor industry. Thanks for your support and enjoy the episode. Andrew.
Hi, Dan.
So 40 years experience almost in the outdoor industry.
Indeed.
What, looking back even beyond that professional experience, what do you think it is that made you end up in the outdoor industry?
When I was young, my mum and dad said, what do you want to do? And I wanted to be a zookeeper. And I think right from the start, I just like getting outdoors, climbing up trees or rocks, nothing hardcore. My parents were like ramblers. We didn't do anything hardcore, but I just like the outdoors. I like plants and animals and blah, blah, blah. And parents completely refused to let me do that. Ended up forcing me to do maths, physics and chemistry A-levels because they would make a real job, and then relented, and I ended up, so we're going too far, but I ended up doing environmental science at university because it was about the closest I could get to doing a degree in animals, and it all started there. So I think the passion, I think just literally just being in woods, just throwing poo sticks under bridges, stuff like that, anything but hardcore outdoors.
Okay, interesting. And you mentioned there that you studied environmental sciences, and you studied that at University of Sunderland, I believe, and got an honours degree from there. When you look back at that time, is there anything actually in your career that you've kind of used what you learned at that point, or has it been completely disconnected?
Yeah, I think there's been a chain of connection. There's been a theme, if you like. And so this was for your viewers, quite how ancient I am. This was 1981. I went, doing A-levels in the late 70s. And there were two environmental science courses in the whole of the UK, Plymouth and Sunderland, Newcastle way. And so it was really, really unknown, whereas these days there's probably hundreds of them. Everyone's talking, we just finished COP, everyone's talking the environment and climate crisis. So I think that theme of an interest in the environment perhaps spreads from 40 years ago to the speech I was giving in Europe last week, or will give next year at the OIA conference about climate crisis and how the environment is impacting everything outdoors. So there's certainly been a theme. The first job, the thing I actually did with the initiative for 3 years was to teach ecology and environment and outdoor at a residential field studies centre. So there's not been an abrupt change. There's been a gentle segue. So I didn't end up being a forester or an environmental science officer or a rat catcher, they used to call them. But there's always been a connection from the environment to teaching the environment, to teaching the outdoors, to loving the environment. And as we always say in the climate work we're doing these days, people that love the outdoors make the best stewards. So there's certainly been a connection all the way through. But I certainly haven't, my thesis, my dissertation was population dynamics of herring gulls, urban seagulls. And so I've never ringed a seagull in anger since.
And then I believe your first entry point, and please correct me if it's not, was actually you started doing some sales at Rohan. So How did you get from that environmental science to sales in Rohan?
Yeah. I was working at this field study centre, an outdoor centre, teaching a variety of ecology, environmental science, but also I used to work about 35, 40 weeks of the year. In the summer holidays, I go off climbing, and which was great for me. Climbing on the anyway, maybe you'll ask me that later, but climbing on the ridiculous cheap, because I had absolutely no money, but a lot of fun. And so some of the weeks we were just teaching middle school environmental science, but other times we were taking people canoeing, archery, climbing, dry ski slope, flat water paddling. And I started getting more and more into indoor stuff, and I got into climbing at uni anyway, and we needed trousers with quick drying and easy and hard wearing and zip pockets to work there. And at the time, 40 years ago, Rohan was sort of it's not that it's an uncool brand now, but now it's perhaps more of a travel brand. Then it was a pretty hard outdoor brand. So I managed to get us a trade deal for all the staff on Rohan stuff. And this was in the days, anyone that's watching this that's heard of Rohan, it was owned or founded by a couple called Paul and Sarah Howcroft, who in their day were staggeringly innovative. First use of synthetic fabrics, first use of stretch fabrics, first you're talking about fast drying next to skin, when everyone was really talking cotton and Ventile pre-Gore. They were the first people to bring Gore-Tex into the UK. So Rohan was a very, very innovative, driven outdoor brand. And so it was really useful stuff for staff uniform. And consequently, I ended up going up to Yorkshire, where they were based at the time, and got into a great relationship with those guys, buying kit from them. Ended up doing my first mountain marathon with their general manager right back in 82, 83. And so consequently, when they moved to Milton Keynes, which they are now based, their head office, or it was until a recent acquisition, I think, they phoned me up and said, right, we're moving to Milton Keynes. We're going to get this big shop. It's much bigger than we ever got before. We want to do other stuff there. We want to do a travel centre in there and advice and make it more of a retail experience, which is amazing. Now, if you think 40 years ago, we're only now talking about retail experiences. So again, Paul and Sarah are really ahead of the curve there. Do you want to come and run it for us? Do you want to do something? And I felt I'd been at the outdoor 3 years, so it just felt like an interesting change. And I was literally only there 3 months, 6 months, and they said, we want to get into America. Do you fancy moving to America and open up America for us? So it was a very dynamic role within Rohan. But yeah, the very first thing was cleaning the windows in the Rohan shop in Milton Keynes with Giles and Sharon. So there were the three of us. And I believe Sharon still works there 40 years later. So we used to sing songs from Greece, and because it was incredibly quiet, because all the Rohan customers were used to buying it mail order. So we had this massive shop, and we were sat there in Milton Keynes, and no one knew we were there. And we were just sort of sitting there, thrumming our fingers on the table, waiting to see what would happen. So we would sing songs and clean the windows. But it was a great start to the industry.
And that took you to the US, you were saying? Wow. So that was so how old were you when you moved to the US?
I guess graduated at 21, 3 years in the outdoor centre. So probably joined Rohan at 24 and pretty much straight to Canada. So based in Vancouver for them. And then the territory that we tried to open up was Vancouver across to Calgary, which is a Glacier National Park area, then down to Denver, and then back across to sort of San Francisco, so the top northwest quarter, where you've got Wyoming and Colorado, a little bit overlap into Utah. Obviously, you've got the whole of the sort of the Calgary, Banff, Lake Louise, and Vancouver ski area on the northwest. Arc'teryx based up in Vancouver in that area. You've got Oregon, the Northwest Peninsula, Washington, Seattle. It's a very outdoory part of the States, and they figured we can only start somewhere such big. But interestingly, looking back now, how people take on America, we went across. I bought a secondhand van, had a bunch of samples that I took on excess luggage, and me. We had a couple of people in the office based in Vancouver, expats, but I was the only salesperson. Put them all in the back of the van and just set off driving around the area. And literally, this is pre-mobile phones. We used to fax things to each other, pre-internet, obviously. And so I'd turn up in a Calgary or Banff or Boulder, and you'd go to a phone book and you'd look outdoor shops and climbing shops, and you'd walk in and you'd knock on the door and say, "I've got some samples of British outdoor brand. Would you let me come in?" And it was just literally that. You would just get the rail out and show them the stuff, try and take some orders. So it was a real seat of the pants, very, very, but great fun. And I don't know what I learned there, but certainly persistence, and certainly just being prepared to go in, and probably naivety, frankly. I have no idea how it should be done. So we just kind of learned on the road. There was a woman that looked after the office, who was kind of the general manager, Cheryl, who was a fantastic mentor to me. And she was an ex-IBM saleswoman of the year, very driven. And she, really learned a lot from her, and kind of, we just made it work bizarrely, and it did all right. We shot our own little mini catalogue up there, so I'm modelling in the catalogue. I was on the road flogging the stuff, and we had no money, so I slept in this van. We had this old panel van with a mattress at the bottom, and I slept in the van, and I used to get out in the mornings. And I remember once in Boulder, Colorado, showering in the sprinklers in the park in Boulder. So I was standing in this park in a pair of shorts, going in a wash. And with hindsight, you look back and, probably lads now doing it would be on expenses and staying in motels and driving in a company hire car. I was in this cabby panel van full of samples, sleeping in the back of it, showering in the village. But then climbing, so I do as much as I could, but all the places I was going to were climbing centers. So I finished in Boulder, and then get in the car and go to El Dorado Canyon and climb for 3 days, and then try and flog some more, and then go and see Gary Neptune's, the classic store there, or over to Seattle, Swallow's Nest, or up to see Mike in Calgary at the White Shade shops. And these were the days when Mountain Equipment Co-op were there. There were a few REI was there, but there were a lot of quality independents still run by enthusiasts, and they were climbers. So you turn up and you flog your stuff, and then you say, well, where should I go climbing? And they'd say, oh, well, come out with the staff. We're all going down the crag this evening. So you just go out and flog my day, climb in the evening, have a couple of Budweisers, and then go to bed and back in my van and do it all again the next day.
Wow. An amazing experience, though, sounds like.
Yeah, for a youngster, yeah. We're about to get a cat to attack us.
There we go.
Hello, Coco. This is Coco Chanel.
You mentioned the word there, persistence. And when I did my research and looking at everything you've done, that word or that mindset or spirit seems to be something that's been, really important for you, or let's say almost key to your career overall. Is that something that you recognize looking back now?
I think any success is a mix of a lot of different things. Go on, Coco. Oh. And but persistence is a huge part of that. I don't think you can expect anything worth getting in the end to come that easily. It's valuable to work for these. And whether it's, I'm just thinking, I don't know, but my sort of sports interests are endurance based, whether it's big North Face alpine routes or Ironman or ultras. I've never been very quick or talented at anything, but I can dig in and give it some, and even when the complete shit's hit the fan and you really are knackered and you are not in for 16 hours, I'm somehow able to just kind of shake it off and crack on again. So I think, and in the persistence, I've made some awful mistakes and had some very challenging times in business, and it's not going to get better by giving up. So I think I always remember I was doing a seminar years ago. There was a chap and he was talking about the value of persistence, and he used examples, and a couple of the ones he used, one of them was Sylvester Stallone, who, bless his cotton socks, one of the most talented athlete in the world, filmmaker in the world, but he had this idea for this boxing movie, and he was schlepping it around the studios and no one wanted to do it, and he finally found someone who wanted to do it, but he said, and another thing though, but I've got to star in it, and they weren't having it, so he schlepped it around another set of studios, and finally he found someone that would let him star in it. He said, and my dog Budkiss has got to be in it as well. And he had this vision, and he was absolutely certain what it was going to look like at the end, and he just refused to give up until he ended up with someone that said, all right, we'll do it. And whatever you think of Rocky 16, wherever they're at now, that original Rocky is quite a good movie, and it's certainly authentic and raw and right down in the streets of Baltimore, and that concept. And that stuck with me. And then the other one was the original Colonel Sanders, who apparently went to over 500 restaurants before he sold his secret recipe. And he used lots of examples like this, but it stuck with me that, these people that say, I rather like the acronym, luck, oh, you've been lucky, and it's labor under correct knowledge. It's like, actually, it's not usually luck. I'm a great believer in good fortune, but not in luck. You just, in my mind, I think persistence and hard work absolutely does play its part. So I've never really been shy of trying to keep going.
Yeah, well, and I think, to your point, you make your own luck. I completely agree. I think it's critical and something that seems to be a little bit almost out of fashion at the moment. It feels like that there's always maybe sometimes there is quicker, more efficient ways of doing things, but at the end of the day, that kind of hard work, determination is, I think, is critical.
Yeah, I think it's, as you say, and one doesn't want to, despite being ancient, one doesn't want to appear ancient or out of touch. And neotonic, the maintenance of childlike characteristics, the concept of always learning. I love that. I'm still learning new things now, and I want to continue learning till I'm 100. But I do believe that persistence and the ability to not say no and to try something, and if it doesn't work, try something else, and if that doesn't work, try something else, and to be adaptable and nimble, agile, with an absolute certainty and clarity about how it will end for you, is certainly a characteristic that we can all benefit from in some way, maybe through a hack, or maybe they're cleaner ways, simpler ways, and that in itself is a talent, of course. But to find those ways, even if you're fortunate enough to stumble on a quick hack one time, there'll be a time when persistence or hard work will pay off and will be useful. And I think personally, I don't take any pleasure, and I wouldn't encourage anyone to revel in the persistence and dig into that martyrish, oh, look at me, I'm doing 90-hour weeks and aren't I hard? Because, you can work really hard badly. It's absolutely about excellence. It's about labor under correct knowledge. It's about working hard in a manner that's progressing to a noble, sustainable, responsible goal that you've got. And so it isn't the work for the work's sake, but I think in my mind, if you finish a huge route or a big race or a business deal and you're absolutely exhausted and you've given absolutely everything to it, then there's an element of it was worth fighting for in the end. That's kind of cool. And
then I think when I look at your career in the industry, so you moved from Rohan, I think maybe to MacPac next, or was
sort of, yeah, a bit of transience in there. So. Into the annals of history here. So I was with Rohan, and I was kind of repping in the UK. So after the States, I came back and I was their trade sales manager. So Rohan historically would sell direct, and those were the days when selling direct was just verboten. Nobody else did it. So nobody would stock their product in outdoor stores particularly, and they had their own catalogue and their own stores, Milton Keynes and a couple of others, Long Preston. And they brought me back from America, and I'd been quite successful in not taking no for an answer, driving around the States and Canada. And they said, well, let's try it in the UK. People are now asking for Rohan that don't live near Milton Keynes or Long Preston. This is pre-internet. So you used to get a postal catalogue and fill out an order form and send it back. So, whilst they did mail order, it wasn't very easy. And so again, I didn't know. So the first thing I did was pick up the phone, and I had a look, and I thought, the people that seem to sell most stuff are a company called Field and Trek at the time, owned by somebody that became a friend afterwards. Some of your viewers might remember Ian Gundle and Mary and Ian Gundle, whose son Richard Gundle ended up taking the business that I went into business with, something else later. So I rang these people up. I had no idea. The naivety is just staggering with hindsight. And they said, oh, hi, I'm from Rohan. I wonder if you wanted to buy some kit. And Ian Gundle said, come and talk to me, my boy. So I went down to Brentwood, Essex, I think it was. And they preceded the entire sort of Field and Trek team. A guy called Chris Harding, who went on to work with Rab later. A guy called Hamish Dunn, who's still the brand director at Mountain Equipment. Ian Gundle, his sons were too young then. They were both still at school, Sean and Richard. And they sat there and belated me and beat me up about how selling direct was appalling and blah, 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 blah. And I just sat there, I had no idea about the history and D2C and blah, blah, the difference between. And at the end of it, guys, yeah, but do you want to buy some of these zipper trousers? And they were like, actually, we probably do, because people do want them. So we opened the Field and Trek account. We got Rohan in the Field and Trek catalogue. So it was a paper catalogue, like the Little Argos catalogues in those days. So you had three. You had the Cotswold catalogue, the Field and Trek catalogue, and the Taunton catalogue. And it would be hard for many of the viewers to have any idea what it's like without being able to have a buy now button on Amazon. But the only way you could get stuff, if it wasn't in the store or they had a size or colour you didn't want, was by the mail order paper catalogue. And so that was the beginning of building the trade business for Rohan. Anyway, consequently, I was schlepping around the country. So I covered the entire country. So Penrose Outdoors in Truro, up to, you've got a pause. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, no, carry on.
Okay, let's see if it works. Penrose Outdoors in Truro, down to Marshalls of Aberdeen and Clive Rowlands of Inverness. So the entire country in a tiny little Citroen car. Actually, I originally had a nice Citroen, but I crashed it in the Lake District. So then I had a really crappy little Citroen and bag of samples again. And it really appeared to be a perfectly reasonable idea that one person could cover the entire country. So I was out for weeks at a time with my border collie called Kim, which is standing for the Carramore International Mountain Marathon, currently called the OM, but this is the mountain. So I was doing a lot of fell running and mountain running at the moment with this dog. And so I would just be on the road for weeks and weeks and weeks. So I kind of knew a lot of people. And consequently, you mentioned what came after Rohan. After I'd been doing that with the whole Rohan thing experience for about 3 years, I was friends with a couple, a guy called Ian Gibson, who's ex-Alpine Sports, ex-Snow and Rock, and a woman called Caroline Croft, who had started a small brand called Calange. So the founders were Caroline Croft and Angela Elliott Walker. Angela Elliott Walker went to found and start the Low Alpine clothing range. So Low Alpine used to be the most popular clothing brand in the UK. Now they obviously only make packs. But in those days, they had their own waterproof called Triple Point ceramic, and they're the first people to do nice fleece, heathered fleece, good-looking fleece, non-technical fleece, which people won't believe that there was a day when only one brand did that, but they were the first people that did really nice-looking casual fleeces. And so Angela and Cal started Cal Ange. Angela left to do the Low. Ian came in from Snow and Rock, and I was having dinner with them one day up in Manchester, and they said, do you fancy coming in? Tiny business. So I came in as a shareholder and director, got out of Rohan, 25, 26, whatever it'll be, and became a shareholder and a director and an owner of this little business, Calange. And found that, so I flogged it all in the north, Ian flogged it all in the south. The cat again, I'm sorry, it will go out. So the cat never ever comes in, and obviously, but on the top of that, Ian did all the warehousing and the operations, and I found I had a bit of a flair, I think, for product and marketing. So I got really involved on the technical design side with Cal, and we made some really quite cool, unusual products. We had a great fan in Dick Turnbull in Outside, who liked some of our stuff, and we got great reviews. So we started to build that brand quite successfully, but it was hard work. There's three of us, plus a seams mistress and an office manager, all done on the back of mortgages. There were weeks where we had to turn the lights off. We had no power. We couldn't pay ourselves on some months, but we built a brand. But it was tough, and we had an opportunity. We were climbing in New Zealand, and the MacPack brand hadn't come out of Australia, New Zealand, and were looking to come into Europe. So we had an opportunity to become the first distributor in Europe for MacPack, MacPack, as with the New Zealand vowels. And so we took that opportunity, and perhaps again back to this theme of persistence. No one wanted it. Everyone was buying Carramore packs. Carramore and Berghaus were the number one and number two pack in the UK. And then there was this newfangled American brand coming in who'd got some offices up in Glasgow. What was Bob? Somebody brought in this newfangled brand from that no one had heard called the North Face. And so they were just kind of tweaking it. And there was, no one was doing Deuter or Fjallraven or anything like that, really. It was primarily just Berghaus and Carramore. And so we No one wanted to buy them, but we went around all our stores. We took samples in. We were the first people to do something called loan stock. So the first people to just say, hey, take this, climb with it for a couple of weeks and let us know what you think. And it kind of helped that we would go out climbing as well with them. This was the times when most people were just pure enthusiasts, no background other than outdoors. So it helped if you go into the shop staff, you'd show them the product, and when everyone clocked off, you say, well, let's go climbing, let's try it and take it out on the hill. So we infiltrated via staff. And I remember the buyer at Cotswold at the time was a guy called Peter Cole, who became a legend in the industry himself. And Peter finally phoned me up and said, you've completely brainwashed all our staff. They all keep asking me for map packs, so come and see me. And so we kind of reversed our way back into Cotswold, Field and Trek, etc. with map pack. And so we ended up growing the map pack distribution business to be as big or bigger than our own Calange own brand. So for 3 years, we had the brand that we owned, Calange, which made funky rock climbing, so pink tights and bright patterned fleeces for Mick Lovett and Ron Fawcett and Johnny Dawes and all this sort of young climbers in the 80s. Not John Dunn, but we'll come back to John Dunn in another time. But did a lot of work with the climbers in the 80s and the 90s. And Matt Peck as well. So did that for 3 years and it was quite successful.
After Macpac, I think then you moved into mountain equipment and Ron Hill, which was let's say quite a bigger part of your career. Yeah. So I'd love to hear more about that, how that developed, and obviously in the end you exited from the brand. So really interested to know some of the challenges and successes and failures of that period.
That's a humongous question. I'll start with the transition, or how on earth it happened. So we were running Calange Map Pack, going well, enjoying it, super seated the pants entrepreneurial stuff, as I say, but it was growing, and sort of we got to 7 figures from nothing, which is always tough. That first million, I think, is a hard point to break through. And this was in the late 80s, early 90s, so it was probably worth more then than it is now, $1 million of sales. Again, pre-internet. Certainly, I remember seeing my first fax in Rohan, and we were faxing everything still in Calange, but we were just starting email, just starting the internet around that late 80s, early 90s in business then. Maybe we were behind the times compared to Silicon Valley, but it was around then. So, it was great fun. We built it up. And we were rung up by a company called Pico, which it transpires was short for Peacock Company, founded by 2 boys called Matthew and Michael Peacock, with an interest to acquire the Calange brand. It transpired because we'd been talking they had a retail arm and they loved our catalogue and our photographs. We had our catalogue punched above its weight. Mainly because I copied the Patagonia catalogue, which was iconic at the time. And we used a similar style and flavour, but with a very irreverent tone. And we used to hide dreadful expressions in the copy, knowing that no one would ring them and wonder if anyone would ring them. So we would, I remember once we had one of our fleeces, the active fleece, perfect for work and foreplay, and we managed to get the foreplay together, and nobody actually remembered to actually, what's that extra E in the middle? Should that just be working for play? But we had a number of little sillies like that, so it was a very irreverent thing. And we had the main photographer for Patagonia was Rick Ridgway, so ours we took all our own photos, couldn't afford a photographer, but he was called Dick Dirigible as opposed to Rick Ridgway. So lots of silly stuff. Anyway, it caught the attention of the guys at Pico Group. And they had got into the industry. They'd purchased Ron Hill, the Ron Hill brand, which had gone into receivership in 1990, something like that. 2 city guys, good funding, both ex-merchant bankers, both sportsmen in their early, mid-20s. And they contacted Calange because they loved the catalogue, and they just thought we were miles bigger than we were. They just saw this catalogue, thought, oh, well, this is amazing. We've got a sports brand, we need an outdoor brand, let's go like this. And when they sort of realised that we were only $1 million and half of that was sort of somebody else's brand with MapPack, it was like they were a bit less interested. But we were growing really strongly, and I was struggling. I felt that the opportunity we had with what we could do with our product and our marketing was greater than our cash flow would allow. It was just challenging. And so I was quite interested in the sale to be nestled within a larger company, and my two partners weren't. And so it was absolutely fine. We didn't fall out, and I would still, great to see Carolyn and Ian again, but they decided they weren't interested in that. So we didn't pursue that. And a month or two later, out the blue, Matthew rang me and said, I've just acquired the intellectual property for mountain equipment. The company had gone bust around 91. A lot of people were interested in buying it, but it hadn't gone via a sort of a traditional disposal acquisition route. And it really got down to a point where there was only really the IP left. There was a bit of stock, 2 members of staff, and people had fought over it. And it was an iconic brand, started in 1961 by Peter Hutchinson. Peter Hutchinson was still around. But they'd had pension fund investment and a few other investments. And Peter was always a fabulous, fabulous product guru, but not necessarily the most savvy business person. And it'd been mismanaged by the pension fund people. So sadly, they hadn't really sold it for a good amount of money. Matthew had really just acquired the IP. Although there's rumor that the people were flying in from Reebok USA, and Matthew managed to sweep it out from under their nose. I think a lot of people would bought it, and if Peter had sold it earlier, it could have gone for a lot more. But Matthew picked it up for a bit of a song. But then I think he literally had no idea what to do with it. He had Ron Hill. They were about to acquire Cotton Oxford, the rugby brand, as well. They had nothing outdoor, no idea about outdoor. So he rang me up, and again, probably looking back with staggering naivety, he said, "Come and run this mountain equipment brand for me." And I said, "Yeah, I can do that." I had no fucking idea. How do you run a brand? There I am, 27, whatever it was. He made me managing director or whatever, it was brand director of this brand, but we had nothing. We had one filing cabinet with some out-of-date clients in. We had some sleeping bags left that was stock in a few boxes. The office sales manager, Dean Wardle, if you're watching this, Dean is still there. Dean, absolute gem for mountain equipment, still working there as the customer service director or something. And then the production manager, Morag Ashworth, who's still a close friend now. And that was it. So we literally started from this. We had no Gore license. You needed a license to have Gore products. We had no Polartec license, so we couldn't buy the fabrics that we needed or to be in the premium end. We had no real patterns or designs and stuff. So it was really quite an exciting opportunity. And with hindsight now, you just think, how on earth did we do it? It was just, but again, that I think staggering naivety, not realizing how big the problem could be, a ridiculous amount of useful confidence, persistence, very hard work. We worked enormous hours, but none of us were married. We were the Ron Hill brand, so we would work in the morning, all run at lunchtime, and Ron Hill was full of world-class runners, Olympians and people. So you'd go out and do a hard session at lunchtime, and then come back and work till late in the evening, then go down. So there was the Foundry and the rope race. There were couple of climbing walls open around that time, so we would go climbing in the evenings. And just work really, really hard and make some dreadful mistakes. We once made a jacket, a Polartec jacket we had two, the Baffin and the Yukon, and it was in a time when Regatta were doing some mountain equipment, done some shelled fleece jackets, the Fastnet and Finisterre, and they've been hugely successful, but also part of their downfall. And then Regatta had got into that area as well. A lot of people wanted these value for money sort of shell fleeces, so we wanted to do a more technical version of it. And I remember there was a product called the Patagonia Glissade, which was kind of really funky, this reversible fleece line jacket. So we did the Baffin and the Yukon, and we vastly over forecast, thousands too many. And one of our German distributors said, "We have Baffin and Yukon to feed to the animals." It's like basically we have more; they're worth less than straw. So we made some dreadful mistakes. We ended up clearing the entire lot to REI, which I still got the contents from the old days. So we did make some absolute dire mistakes, but somehow or other, through all the dreadful mistakes, we stumbled on. I think I managed to convince WL Gore to re-give us a license. This was at a time when Phoenix were about to go bust. So Phoenix had racked up this enormous Gore bill. Gore used to just keep selling product fabric to people and not ask for money until they were so far in hock that it was a disaster. So they had this similar challenge with other brands. So it was kind of was tough times. Our rep was a guy called Andy Warrinder, who ended up being the global head of WL Gore. So it was quite funny that I remember when he came in with his samples. He's now retired, but very successful at WL Gore. And anyway, we re-got the license. I don't know, cheek, bare-faced chutzpah, I don't know. But anyway, we got the license again. I think they believed in the IP, perhaps the brand, the Mountain Equipment brand. Even the brand, they'd got the iconic M, but they'd mashed it up and put a very bad version of it with the Mountain Equipment done badly, and the logo was 20 Everest expeditions. It was all mashed in there. So we threw that away. We restarted with the iconic M, and we used a font called Eagle Bold Extended, and they're still using that today now in 2023 at the Bolling Group, who now own Mountain Equipment. So I remember when we did that really early on. It's amazing, isn't it? We bought this brand, which is meant to be iconic, and the first thing I did was throw the brand away and redesign it. Again, the extraordinary naivety of youth. But I guess I must have had some sort of vision, some sort of clarity that it might be worth doing, because they're still using it now 30 years later. And so we repositioned that equipment. It had gone right downhill. It had been chasing price point. We repositioned it. We got a Gore license. We got a Polartec license. I took the iconic photograph that Mountain Equipment have used over the years, and I saw it at Kendal Mountain Festival, this literally 2023, is of Andy Parkins summiting Broad Peak. He's wearing a full red Gore-Tex shelled, a down suit. I think the photo's taken by Pete Boardman. And he's just summiting Broad Peak with the whole of the Himalaya out behind him, with a big white sort of African dish dash sort of wrapped around his head, just looking hardcore. It's a stunning photograph. And in Kendal, it still looked good this year, but 30 years ago, it was real Mountain Equipment returning to its roots. Mountain Equipment was this brand that had done the first British ascent of every 8,000 metre peak, both the poles. Mountain Equipment started in the 60s when there was really only Carrymore Troll Mountain Equipment. There were very, very few brands. Berghaus was one of the first brands. It had lost its way, and we repositioned it as this iconic brand. And that really began that whole stage. We also owned, so at that time I went in as managing director of Mountain Equipment, but Matthew Peacock, the mention I mentioned, got very bored very quickly. I think he was much used to the pace of finance down in London, and he was great at buying brands and selling brands, but dreadful at managing and running them, the best one in the world. And I'm still in touch with Matthew. He's a wonderful chap. He's been infinitely more successful. He runs the Hanover Investment Fund, which has hundreds of millions under investment in London now. Very, very successful. So Matthew got fairly fed up fairly quickly, and our finance director of the group was a guy called Ian Powell. And by now, I suppose we're a year or two in. I'm doing all this work on Mountain Equipment, but I obviously found that I had a little bit of a talent or a touch for product and marketing particularly, and perhaps overlapping into relationships and sales. And so by now I was working with the product and marketing team at Ron Hill, and the product marketing team with Cotton Oxford, the rugby brand that we owned within the group, and the product and marketing team at Arena Swimwear, which we own for the UK. And so it was a really, really eclectic, diverse sort of portfolio of brands. So one day I'd be designing a down suit, and the next day we'd be out with a bunch of runners, and the next day we were up at Murrayfield trying to negotiate the Scottish rugby contract. So I can't even begin to think how one juggles that lot these days, but youth and enthusiasm and a blinding lack of reality perhaps. So we did kind of manage it, but it was going okay, but Matthew was getting bored. And so Ian Powell, finance director, and myself, who was by then the group product and marketing director, which is, if you think that's staggering, how did I go in 2 years to be a brand director for one brand to the group product and marketing director? But it was probably just because we just had no idea what we were doing. You've got to remember there weren't many sports and outdoor brands around. I mean, Nike was only created a year or two before, so it was a very fast growing. You could make a heck of a lot of cock cock-ups and still make money in those days. So I think we made less cock-ups than others. That's probably the best claim to fame. So we were juggling all these things, and Matthew got fed up, and Ian, who was our finance guy, Ian was great on finance and operations, and I appeared to have a little bit of a flair for sales, product and marketing. And so Ian said, I think we can do a management buyout here and get this business. I think Matthew would take an offer. He's fed up with it all. So we did a deal, a long and complex deal involving venture capital, etc. And it meant that we would sell the Cotton Oxford rugby brand and the arena distribution and a few other bits and pieces, and ended up with quite a clean. So we ended up owning the building and Ron Hill and the mountain equipment brand. It was a little bit to in and from with mountain equipment licensing deal, but fundamentally we ended up having mountain equipment and Ron Hill with Ian and I at the helm owning that business at half each. And that was hugely exciting. Ian, I'm still in business with Ian and other things for 30 years later. Very, very talented accountant, KPMG, very commercially astute, and no interest or empathy or flair at all for product or marketing or sports or outdoors, just a brilliant numbers man. And I was virtually dyslexic on the numbers, but really loved the product. So there was a real yin and yang, a real fit that, like any good climbing partnership, I trusted him at his end of the rope and he trusted me at my end of the rope. And so it really worked. He didn't do my job, I didn't do his job. We set about running those two brands. We had a great team on both. And early on, we brought in, I previously mentioned at the buying director at Field & Trek, a guy called Hamish Dunn, to come and run the mountain equipment brand. And then Mike Deegan, who was ex-Ron Hill, had been in the old days with Ron. He came back to help run the Ron Hill brand. And we really set about, the next 10 years, really developing those brands.
You mentioned there the fact that you had very complementary skills with your partners. I wonder, throughout your career, have you gone outside of that kind of group of partners and looked for mentors or coaches to support you and to guide you? Or, have you used those type of resources?
Yes. Possibly not too much in sort of face-to-face, as one would imagine, a traditional sort of mentor or coaching, business coaching role, but fascinated by the whole idea of and concept of. And the very early 90s, when I was trying to, again, this is, having got a degree ringing seagulls, what did I know about marketing? And again, of course, marketing was the Wild West. This new thing called the internet had just been invented. There was this guy called Steve Jobs who'd got an alternate computer called Apple. So we were all on these Apples that didn't really work, but we kind of liked them. And everyone else on Microsoft, and nothing talked to each other. So these are the days, you bought full bleed adverts and you printed them in High magazine or Mountain magazine. So marketing was something I was kind of trying to understand and learn what influenced people buying things. So I went and did a course in something that was in the 90s, 80s and 90s, was quite new then, called NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, which is fundamentally a little bit of it's a California-based mishmash of psychology and language patterns and influence patterns, but there's still some fascinating work in NLP, and a lot of the early NLP work has more popularly these days been morphed into what's now perhaps known more as coaching and the use of of language patterns and influence patterns and working with people to get the best out of people. So I started reading a lot about NLP. Ended up, because whatever I do, I either don't do it at all or I do try to do it quite well. And so I do get in. My best man at the speech said in the wedding said something about and Andrew believes he's focused, everybody else thinks he's obsessed. But I certainly am conscious that I can be quite focused. And so so trust me, I thought, right, I need to know about this. So who's the founder of it? Right, I need to go to California, meet this guy. So I ended up doing an NLP practitioner certificate. Then I ended up doing a master's and ended up doing a trainer's, and really understanding. So I was working directly with Rich Bandler and John Grinder, the founders of those language pattern skills, and a number of people in the area on influence why people behave in ways they do, and a lot of this work has morphed into cognitive behavior therapy now, comes from a lot of that early work from Virginia Satir and forgotten the other method, I'll come back to me. So I was really starting to be quite interested in it, and to the point that I then even started to get into transactional analysis therapy work and psychology and behavioral psychology, and why not only do people buy and sell things, but why we behave in different ways. And so I had quite a number of coaches, and then I was just seeking out people in these areas who were excellent, but both people that I thought were genuinely good. I went again to the States and then to Switzerland to see Stephen Covey, that wrote probably the best-selling business book of all time, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And rather than go to a Covey disciple British thing, I said, well, I'm going to go and see the real guy, haven't you? And actually, spent 3 days with Stephen Covey. I went to see, possibly a little bit more populist, but fascinating to see his communication skills. Anthony Robbins a couple of times, and how he can hold 3,000 people in the palm of his hand for 3 days. Fascinating drive and charisma. So learning different things from different people. So learning structure from Bandler, and learning what Covey's done is fundamentally dilute loads and loads of mentors and try to understand common themes and common rules and common goals from those guys. So how did he do that? How do you take a complex ecosystem and dilute it down to clear rules that you can follow? How did Robbins collect that communication, passion and energy and charisma and convert it into that raving fans that he's got, that recruitment retention of people? So I always enjoyed most years going to see Zig Ziglar on sales. What's the other Brian? Oh, the other great sales American, Brian Tracy. So I used to go, particularly Americans. There's something about Americans and sales and marketing and communication side. So I went to the RADA and did a dramatics course on presentation skills and communication. I went to do a 3-day stand-up comedy course on which ended up doing an open mic in London, which was desperately challenging, way outside my comfort zone, but learning how to entertain, learning how to be on stage, learning how to communicate, So I have X, I want Y, how do I make that transaction happen? So the transaction analysis side, that's something that is used in relate therapy, but it's also used in corporate transactions and how different departments, how different people, how negotiations take place, business negotiations, transactions. So I really enjoyed digging into the understanding of that process. And to answer your question, to come full circle, the mentors perhaps were both authors and presenters and even founders of disciplines, and to work directly with them. And I always like to try and go to source and understand and then extrapolate back from them. So I would say, I mentioned Cheryl, the mentor, the IBM Salesperson of the Year in Canada. I'd say Matthew Peacock, I learned a lot from in the 2 years I was with Matthew. Ian, my business partner, learned a huge amount from Ian, who's gone on to be a hugely successful chief exec himself. So always tried to learn with people and from people. And of course, team members and staff right the way through. But I'd say the ones that have really stood out for me perhaps have been the international people I've gone to see.
Okay. It's clear that outdoor activity sport has been an important part throughout your career. Obviously something that you're very passionate about, you love doing. But is it also something, at the same time when I listen to you, you're clearly, whatever you're doing it at 110, maybe 200%, depending on who you talk to. So you're clearly very, very dedicated. So what role does, whether it's running, climbing, whatever, kind of play in helping you maintain that level of intensity? Because I guess maybe when you're younger, it's easier to do that, to maintain it. But the older you get, probably the more difficult that is. So what role does outdoor activities, whatever they may be, play in that, in your ability to do that?
I mean, getting back to the core of that, the first point of that, the intensity of doing something in that. I'm 60 now, 61 soon. And when I was young, no one had even heard of Autistic Spectrum Disorder or Asperger's or anything like that. I'm a very focused person, and a lot of entrepreneurs are, and I'm, whether there's a spectrum or a scale, who knows? But I've certainly always been very, very focused and driven if I want to do something. And I still struggle to understand why anyone would want to do something and not do it well. And perhaps I'm out of step with that, and that's fine. I'm quite happy that I'm not in the middle of the distribution curve. So whatever I do, and whether it does drive some people bananas, I don't know. I remember once being in a design meeting, and then poor designer, with hindsight, Helen Kilner, I apologize, Helen, if you're watching this, was in tears because I'd sent this thing back again. And I was trying to explain. I said, Helen, I'm the grit that enables you to make the pearl. It's just not right yet. And I'm really sorry, but I know it's better than the Berghaus hood, but it's still not right. I want our hood to be perfect. People laugh. I got into coffee and it's like bloody Starbucks in the corner over there. And when I went down to London, did a 3-day barista course on getting the right perfect coffee. My wife works in TV and movies and had to do a job on a motorbike, so she got a motorbike license and said, "Oh, I think you'd like this." And I put it off for ages, but then in the end, I thought, "Oh, I'll do that." And then I ended up doing the highest qualification the civilian can ride on a motorbike. And she's like, "You're obsessed. What's wrong with just riding a motorbike like normal people do?" It's like, well, if you're going to do it, you just got to do it as well as you could possibly do it. And it's just not worth starting. So I'm shit at a lot of things, but if I do something, I'm usually fairly competent at it, or at least try to be. And I think that's, so whether that's a fault, I don't know, but it's a drive, and it's historic, and it's everything. But I'm not enormously talented at anything, to be frank. But that drive. So I used to work with those climbers that were brilliant, and I tried to climb, but I never got that good. I mean, I climbed some pretty decent routes, but you're never as good as your athletes. Or I got into triathlon. So, okay, if you're going to do triathlon, what's the hardest triathlon in the world? The Ironman. If you're going to do that, then I might as well try and get into the World Championships and get into the British team. But I wasn't very talented, and I had injuries and challenges. I got into it late. So the goal I set myself was to be within the top 100 in the world in my age group, and I got 91st in the World Championships in the Ironmans, and that was cool. So I do kind of like. I think that intensity can be tempered by realism. I quite like, and it's very tedious, smart goals, and anyone's done any coaching knows it's coaching level 1, but not only a specific, measurable, and attainable goal, a realistic goal. And so rather than saying I want to win Kona, I said I'd like to be 100 in the world and hit 91st. So that was good enough. I have to say, about 2 minutes after crossing the finish line, I figured out how I could take 15 minutes off my time and get in the top 50. But so I think, in answer to your question, I think that intensity is in everything I do. And we were watching a movie once, and the character turned to her spouse and said, "I know I'm not an easy person to love." And I suspect that might be, my wife's probably got a lot of patience. I don't know, you met her last night. But she's put up with me, and thank you. But I think that intensity is in most things I do, if not everything. And perhaps having the release of the outdoor sports enable, I think it may be everything. If you only did one thing, I'm really eclectic. So I love running the businesses, but I run a portfolio of businesses. I love playing piano. I love doing my sport. I love climbing. I love skiing. I love our animals. So perhaps I'm able to mellow that intensity over such a broad, being competent at a number of things. I think if I poured all that intensity to one thing, it would drive everyone insane, including myself. So maybe these outdoor sports are the release, the pressure valve down, perhaps, for allowing me, because I think I'm very conscious of it. I can get really, really channeled. And if the poor guys at the OIA now, or Mountain Equipment as it was, or wherever, it must be exhausting working with me. So maybe the fact that every now and then I'll switch off from the business and go and, I'm a really keen cyclist, and I've got 9 bikes in the garage out there, but I love just tinkering with them and getting it exactly right, and getting these components to be just right, and doing all the research to get the best derailleur at the moment. So taking that intensity and putting it into the motorbike thing, or whatever thing it is I want to be good at. Perhaps it's a a release so that it doesn't become overwhelmingly intense in the business. Does that answer the question?
Yeah,
in a very
absolutely.
roundabout way.
No, absolutely. Well, it leads nicely to the next question, because as you just mentioned, at the moment you're the owner of several different businesses, or involved in the ownership of several different businesses. You're a council member for several different businesses and associations. You're Secretary General for It's Great Out There, Chairman for Sheffield the Outdoor City, part owner and director of the Climbing Centre, obviously CEO of the OIA, which we haven't got to yet. And I'm sure there's other things that I've not mentioned. You were talking last night about your involvement in your daughter's school and the group of schools. As you've mentioned, you're married. Yeah. As I just mentioned, you have a daughter. So how on earth do you manage to find a balance between all that? And the right balance, if there is such a thing as the right balance, because I definitely haven't found it, if there is. But
Yeah. I do love that word, balance. We've got a slack line at the bottom of the garden, and I'm really into yoga at the moment. So again, my poor wife, really got me into yoga. She thought it might calm me down. So I'm doing my yoga trainer's exams next year. So so it's like, for God's sake, this was meant to calm you down. Anyway, I'm really into yoga now. But balance, that's what brought me from yoga, sorry. It's absolutely vital, isn't it? And I think despite the intensity, or perhaps because of it, I don't know, when Ian and I sort of split, and after selling Mountain Equipment, or Matthew split, then they've absolutely focused on businesses and running, one or two businesses, making way more money than I have. But I've stayed in the outdoors because I'm passionate about it. I love it, but because it does enable that balance, I think, for me. I've just got back from an expedition to Baffin Island. I was away for nearly a month. I always go away every year on a trip or an expedition. I managed to train probably 6 days a week, so I'm still racing and still fit for my age group. And I think if I'd gone into a single business with that level of intensity or drive, then I think it would have been, I don't know, potentially overwhelming for me. I don't know, mental fragility in doing too much in one area. So I think being able to spread the businesses out over a wide portfolio is enjoyable, and being able to spread life out right from the beginning. I've always wanted to stay in the outdoors and the environment and that balance, because it enables me to spread, I think, the intensity in that way. And so having that balance is absolutely essential. And I look back over the career, and I think, we sold Mountain Equipment business when I was 39 for significant. If one wanted to, one could have just retired then. I did briefly, went to Chamonix and did the season there, and it's amazing how boring being retired is at 39 or 40. But so I've always had to have other things, but I'm glad I tried to spread it and balance it. And I think I'm quite proud and have the fact that the 20 years after selling Mountain Equipment, I've done loads of different things, and in this and out that, and fabulously enjoyable and exciting, but nothing in such an amount that it overwhelms. Nothing that in the last 20 years, not a single week has gone by when I haven't trained or been outdoors or been on my bike, or been with my daughter. You saw Miss Filman down, stayed with us last night. I was up this morning playing the piano with my daughter, doing a bit of homework, took her to school. Then if you weren't here, I'd be cracking into some work. I get out on the bike in the afternoon, cracking a bit more work, pick my daughter up. I love that mix, because if I dropped dead tomorrow, I would just be so grateful for my life. I wouldn't have any regrets at all. I'm planning at the moment. My current intensity is to get to the Ironman at 100. So I'm really, really working very hard on health span at the moment. I'm really into longevity and driving health, because I've got a 9-year-old daughter and I absolutely want to be an active grandfather. So I need to work harder than others on that. So that's my current level of intensity or focus. But I think the way you get there, for me anyway, is to have that balance, that portfolio, that, I love my training and my fitness, but I'm not doing Ironman anymore. I don't have the time for that, but that's okay. So, there's a bit of training, and there's a bit of enjoyment, there's a bit of business, there's a bit of family, and finding that balance where everyone's happy. I think one of the challenges for it perhaps is the capacity. and I perhaps have got a little bit more energy or capacity than some, or willingness to fit into the 24 times 60 minutes a day. So that perhaps is a tiny bit of a juggling skill. But for me, never losing touch of what that end point needs to be, which is a contented, happy, enjoyable, successful life that you can be absolutely proud of, and at any point finish and say that was good. I'm pleased about that. I left nothing out on the table, and that's how balance is essential for that. Because I think if you finish, some of my business people saying, "Oh yeah, I made millions and millions," but gosh, I'm got diabetes now, and I can barely pick up my grandchildren, and I'm just knackered. Or the sports people that have got no pension because they did nothing else. Or it's, for me, if I got too intense into any one area, it would unbalance everything, and then might be regrets. So to try to, the rising tide lifts all boats. To try and keep that balance is such that at any one point, you're doing everything well enough. And if you're not doing it, then you don't care about it. It doesn't matter.
So we touched briefly on the OIA, so the Outdoor Industry Association for the UK, that obviously you're CEO and have been now for
12 years.
I was going to say over 10 years,
It was meant to be 3 months.
So, well, that's a good place to start. So why is it now 12 years? What is it that keeps you wanting to do that?
Yeah. I was sat next to Mark Held in the airport at Espoo yesterday. Mark's the Secretary General of the European, or the first Secretary General of the European Outdoor Group, and he's just retired. And he said, "Andrew, I never thought you'd last this long." I said, "Neither did I, Mark. Neither did I." So go back in time 12 years then, and I just finished a contract with the wonderful Williams family at ARC, who had bought the brand, the original mountain marathon. It was the KIM, the Carrymore International Marathon. Mike Ashley bought Carrymore. Ian and I failed to buy Carrymore, so we were briefly in the loop of trying to buy Carrymore with Stephen Cannon, a project there. But Mike Ashley bought Carrymore, didn't want or need the KIM brand or the event, so the Williams family managed to get hold of it, and I helped with that process. And then for a couple of years I was the race director and did the transition and did some work with those guys at which is a fabulous 2-day mountain marathon event, which I love running as well. So I did the first in 1984, and I did my 25th mountain marathon a couple of weeks ago in Snowdonia, which was nice. And what was funny is that I was knackered and barely finished it in 1984, and I was knackered and barely finished it now. And in the middle, I kind of did okay in the elite section, but I thought, well, at 60 to be roughly the same as at 21, it's probably not far off. So it was okay. I enjoyed it. I love it. It's great to get out. But anyway, so I just finished that contract, and I had a bit of space, and somebody rang me up and said, "Have you seen this advert looking for a part-time chief exec of the Outdoor Industry Association," which had just changed its branding from the Camping and Outdoor Leisure Association, COLA. And it had historically been this trade organisation that ran a big trade show in Harrogate called the COLA Trade Show. And I think as much as anything, I was a bit bored. I don't do boredom very well. So so I've got a big poster upstairs in my room saying "Getting bored is not allowed." So it's just, if you look at my diary, honestly, there are an absolute minimum of 365 entries. There is never a day where there's not something in it. And if there is a free day, then I'll put in a 3-hour bike ride or something. So I'm terrible at getting bored. I have probably almost a phobia of it. So I was thinking, oh God, what am I going to do? We've just done this deal. That's kind of running down. The climbing wall's trugging along. John's running that. We must talk about the climbing wall. But this looks interesting. I'll find out a bit more about it. And I dug in and thought, oh, it looks interesting. I'll go along for the interview, because I knew the people on the interview panel. So it was Corey Taylor, who's the owner of Bradshaw Taylor, who's become a great friend, who was the chair at the time. Anthony Griesby, the owner of Countryside Skiing Climb, which is another great friend of mine now. And then somebody, Matt Eastman from the Camping and Caravan Association, which I now do a lot of work with the guys there. So I thought, I'll go along to the interview and find out what it's all about. And went along, and it was for this 2-3 day a week part-time chief exec. And interview went well and blah, 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 blah. So I was probably right person, right time. They didn't really have an awful lot of money. They thought they had a lot of needs. So I said, well, let's give it a crack for a few months and see if we both fit in. And so I think literally about a couple of days after they offered it to me, I shot up to their head office in Edinburgh and I phoned Corrie, who was the chair. And I said, Corrie, you do realise you're probably insolvent. I said, this is an absolute disaster at the moment. We really, and Corrie was like, oh my God, Andrew, you need to help us. You need to sort this out, And I said, right, well, I don't think you can afford to pay me anything. So, but I'll help you out. Let's do it for 3 months and see if we can turn it around. So we closed the offices. That they had offices for some reason that they clearly didn't need. And sadly, we had to let go of some staff. And I worked about 6 months for no remuneration. In fact, I lent them some bunch of cash flow for a while, but I had incredible support from Anthony and Corrie and the other members of the board there. And they could see that I had a vision of what it could be. And we transferred it from a trade body into a non-profit, an international non-profit called a community interest company. We gave it a new vision statement, a new brand statement. And I have to say, I did pay them to do it, because I just loved doing it. And so I did 6 months, complete rebrand, new business plan, new business statement, a whole raison d'etre. At the same time, went round, and all the main brands had kind of left it. They were down to about 60 members because there was no trade show anymore, so there was no real reason to join. Went round and just sat in front of Keith Black and said, you've got to believe in me, Keith, I'm going to make this work. And you're going to please rejoin. And Keith did. And sat in front of Richard Cotter at Berghaus and said, come on, Rich, you've got to believe in me. We're going to make this work. Please rejoin. And he did. So definitely pulling out some friends and some contracts. And the board were incredibly supportive. The board prepaid membership for the year after to help us through the cash flow. And kind of by the beginning of 2012, it was really starting to turn around and look like the beginnings of what it looks like today. It had gone from being a kind of a meaningless trade body that didn't own a trade show to a non-profit with a clear vision of, in brief, to grow the pizza for everybody. Could an association be made where everybody put a little bit of money in the pot? And I worked it out, it was about, for every £100 fleece you sold, it was about a penny. So a tiny bit of money in the pot that could be used for common good to grow the pie, to grow the pizza. So not that the North Face slice is bigger than the Berghaus slice, but that the whole pizza was bigger. And that could we engage with the entire outdoor recreation sector, not just the brands, not just the retailers? Could we talk to National Trust, the Ramblers, British Mountaineers, British Canoeists, in the government, DCMS? How could outdoor grow? Was there a benefit to Britain being more like Scandinavia, where a naturally healthy outdoor Britain would in so many ways, from active commuting to forest schools to old age walking clubs and walking for health? Could we get a healthier, active Britain? Some of the very early research I did was that Scandinavia sells 3.5 times per capita the amount of outdoor gear that we did over here. Well, what could we do to make that influence? So that whole plan was really in the first 3 to 6 months, where we cut all the costs out completely. We shrunk it right back and restarted it, and it was really, really exciting and really, really enjoyed it. So that sort of 3 to 6 month turnaround project finish. And it was then at the point we did have enough members to start sort of paying some of those previous expenses and then start to put a little bit of money back in the pot for some consulting days. So I was never employed. I was just doing days as and when, which is what enabled them obviously for me to do all that work without any costs. So but come 2012, we sort of turned that round, and I just thought, well, I'll just stay a little bit longer. I'm quite enjoying this. And then there was the Olympics in 2012, and we just kind of, again, I think, my persistence. I was just down quite a lot, talking to Sport England, talking to government, saying, outdoors is important. No, outdoor recreation wasn't recognised as a sport. Walking wasn't recognised as a sport. This is pre-comp climbing, really. Getting the funding and the recognition. It certainly hadn't got an Olympic recognition at the time, and so we were lobbying's, not necessarily the right word, but I went from literally phoned up my local MP, said, how do you lobby? With, again, startling naivety. Perhaps that's another theme, the ability to ask the naive questions or the willingness to be an idiot and to get it wrong and then get it right again later. So I just kind of started going down to London. Everything seemed to be in London. All the big businesses, all the big influencers, all the big money seemed to be down in town. And so and with that Olympics, I managed to meet Lord Coe, who I had kind of met previously through Ron Hill, so I had some connections in there. And so I leveraged that and we started to drive that. And there was a real growth in, with hindsight now, with the mess we're all in at the moment, you look back on the halcyon days of how amazing the energy was in 2012 when the Olympic opening ceremony, but there was a real pro-Britain flavour. So we launched a project called Britain on Foot, which was a project to try and get everyone behind a common goal of getting more people more active outside. It probably now the closest to that is the Get Outside campaign that we partner with the Ordnance Survey. So it was just really, really enjoyable. And it was a bit like pushing on an open door on the lobby side. So we just got involved. I got into Number 10, started working with David Cameron and the sports minister there. There was a moment in time where something could be created that was needed. There was a gap. There was an opportunity in the market for a non-profit to grow something central for everybody. It probably just fitted my skill set, that persistence, that drive, that make that future goal and absolutely and utterly visualize it. How did it sound? How does it look? How does it feel? How will you create it? And just fundamentally then backcast to creating it with an absolute certainty that it will happen. It just was the right time. And, no employees, on my own, beavering away, which, I'm possibly hard to work with. So it's great to just be able to do it myself. And it just was a time and a place where what was needed and the skill set that I perhaps had just fitted well, Dan. And it was, I just really, really started to enjoy it. I loved the lobby inside. I loved having influence. And by 2015, Dave Cameron and the sports minister asked me to co-chair a government working group to create a national outdoor recreation strategy, which followed by 250 million going via Sport England into the Sporting Futures and the work they did that previewed the Uniting the Movement work. The recognition of outdoor recreation for the first time in a DCMS sports strategy launched by the PM in Parliament with a bunch of grey suits and me there in a bright green mountain equipment jacket. So really bringing outdoors into the awareness, and there isn't a single. I was in Parliament 2 days ago, sat next to Tony Blair on a big Labour Party thing on the day that Rwanda was in. Met with the Environment Minister in the afternoon, Sports Minister for lunch. There isn't a department that we don't work with now that isn't aware of outdoors. I had a great moment. I'd worked with Cameron in the past. Dave Cameron, he's obviously back now, and I bumped into Dave Cameron, and they went, "Oh, outdoor guy," and he couldn't remember, but he knew who I was. He knew who we were. I always wear brands, preferably British brands when I'm down in Parliament. I don't go in the suit. I try and be that point of difference to raise the awareness of outdoors, because I absolutely, utterly, passionately believe that a life lived closer to nature, closer to the environment, in an active manner outdoors, in any way, and I'm not talking about climbing in the TD plus North Face, in any way outdoors is a better life and would be a better country for that. And so I just so enjoyed that side of the work. And at the same time, to grow the pizza, if you remember, there was OTS, there was the trade show, there was the cause show, there was the rocks show, there was the snowball, there were workshops all over. There was an on tour with Salomon and another on tour with somebody else. It was so dispersed after the cola show had broken up that we made it really, again, perhaps with this passion or intensity or drive or relentlessness, I don't know, just said, but this is just daft. We should be saving time, saving money, saving carbon, saving costs, saving effort. Just bloody let's get together again. We don't need to be fighting. We've got other shit to fight. So we managed to pull all that lot back together with OTS. And then we started to address the sustainability challenges, the climate group work that we've been doing. We've recently started to address women in the industry, mentoring schemes, breaking the glass ceiling. We've done loads of work with EDI, with the Opening Up the Outdoors campaign, raised hundreds of thousands to improve diversity, inclusion, and accessibility to everybody in the outdoors. So each of these areas has been so exciting and so much fun that it's, it's still, I was absolutely convinced I was going to retire at 40, and then I had thought about it at 50, and then I was absolutely certainly going to at 60, and now I don't really know now. So I'm just still loving it, and there's challenges to do still. So that's the 10-year OIA summary.
Oh, but that's great. Well, if you still have the passion and the energy and the desire to do it, as you said, I think it's such an important topic, to get more people outside. I think, and I think your point around encouraging collaboration and driving collaboration as an industry for us is so important, because I think the outdoor industry on its own is not a big industry if we compare it to some of the other industries that are lobbying Parliament. So we have to kind of work together to get the best results for the industry, for sure.
Yeah.
This is clear.
And that's interesting you say that, because that's always been. So the specific trade in the UK is about $1.5 billion. The broader outdoor recreation sector, if you include campsite fees, hill walking, mountain guides, all this stuff, it's about 20 to 22, 24 billion. So it's significant, but it's tiny compared to, the GDP. And so right from the beginning, we've latched onto NHS waiting lists, healthy childhood, the obesity challenge, the diabetes 2 challenge. There's just, I was just doing this work yesterday with the minister down there, and we're putting together some work to try and really impact the manifestos for next year. And some of the shocking facts we're putting together. 25 limbs a day are amputated through diabetes 2. Diabetes 2 is costing 10 billion a year. Obesity, 98 billion, the cost of the UK last year in sick days and time off in NHS. Childhood obesity, now children are leaving school at 10 or 11, 35%, and more than a third of them are now overweight or obese. Diabetes starting as young as 8. Inactivity impacting mental health, ADHD, ASD, so much disassociation with nature, disassociation with physical activity outdoors. It's a deep, deep fundamental challenge and problem for our society, that we are becoming less active and less engaged with our natural environment, right down to the mitochondrial level of how our bodies and brains work, how they develop in utero, as they develop in the first 3 years of early attachment work and early engagement and brain development. It's fundamentally vital that people are physically active outdoors in some way, shape or form, and not, extreme skiing and all the shit that I do, but just any way at all. Digging your garden, going for a walk with your dog, playing poo sticks with your kids, building campfires, anything and everything. Just continuing that engagement, whether everyone's watched the Wall-E movie, where all the beast people are floating around in the anti-grav chairs because they've lost the ability to walk or do almost anything else. It's a terrifying future, and one that's, genuinely, we will not solve the NHS crisis by throwing more drugs at sick people. We have got millions of people who are eating shit, sitting on sofas doing nothing, and it's costing them their lives and this country hundreds of billions of pounds. And the simple solution to that is walk to school, get outdoors, do something. And if we can get that across, it addresses everything. It addresses our net zero targets by active commuting. It addresses our mental health targets. It addresses the emotional health. It addresses digital addiction. It addresses body dysmorphia in teenagers. It addresses a vast, vast host of the current modern age digital challenges that we face by simply putting down that phone, getting active outdoors in some way, shape or form. And it's of course it's not the only solution, but if you look at the list of the happiest nations in the world by wellness and happiness scores that are put together by the ONS here and other countries, and you combine those scores and you overlay them with connections to nature and physical activity outdoors, it's no surprise that the happiest countries in the world are Norway, Denmark, Sweden, New Zealand, Finland, Iceland. These are countries that are engaged in the outdoors, active in the outdoors, still involved in the outdoors. And it's absolutely, if you want to improve the wellness of a score of a country, then improve its physical activity outdoors and its connection to nature. It is literally as simple as that. And it's almost free. It's a question of cultural change rather than financial investment. It's not another 100 billion into the NHS. It's deep cultural change. And that's what we want to like to if I have any legacy, I wouldn't want it to be, making mountain equipment or rebranding mountain equipment or whatever. It would be about making a tiny difference, perhaps, to the way we're active outdoors in the UK.
You've talked about the fact that you have lots of bikes in your garage, so I'm interested. Favorite piece of outdoor gear? Ooh. And I know that's like probably an impossible question, the most difficult question of the day.
I did wonder if we were going to do like a tour of the house, and my garage has got 9 bikes hanging in it, and then next door it's got a massive ski rack with all of those, and then upstairs it looks like it's probably slightly bigger than Anthony Greasebury's shop upstairs. So I've got a huge, and being obsessive and organised, you've got a bin for bike gear, bin for hardware climbing, software climbing, winter climbing, midwear, basewear. Everything's lined up. All the fleeces first, then the down, then the synthetic. So how on earth does one pick a bit of favourite gear? I am absolutely a gear addict. It's terrible. The only way I can possibly justify it with the sustainability and where we should be at the moment is I do buy the latest gear. I feel that I'm representing the outdoor industry sector, and wearing a tatty old Patagonia retro pile that I've got for 20 years old, which I still love, isn't appropriate down to Parliament, but I don't want to wear a suit. So I do wear a lot of brand new gear. I am very fortunate. I pay for everything, but I do get a bit of a pro deal account from a number of brands. Thank you, brands. So I do try and wear the latest gear. So got another brand. There we are, Arc'teryx and Black Diamond, Mountain Equipment, Salomon. So a good selection of my members' gear on. But consequently, I constantly churn and eBay all the stuff out, and I never put reserve price on. So I do. So if you're 6'2" and an American medium or a men's or a British large, then watch my eBay site, because there's loads of great deals, and I never put reserve on it. And joking apart, I love the idea that there are people out there, students or people that perhaps not got such a disposable income that are now getting great deals, and they're getting out active on the hill with some decent gear. So I'm sorry to say I've got too much gear, and I shouldn't, but there I have. My favourite bit of it then, when you said that, I'm a great believer in that old coin toss trick, whether it's the right answer or not, what's the first thing that pops into your head, because it often gives you an indication, and then you can review it. And I've got a set of Salomon MTN 95s, they're touring ski, and I mounted them with the so not the Dynafit binding, although obviously it's got to be a Tech binding for me, but the ATK binding, the Italian people that make the ultralight version, the race version, which is only 120 grams, and it's in anodized blue, so it fits the color scheme. So I think the Salomon 95, it skis almost as well as an alpine ski, but it's really light. It's light enough, not quite as light as a race skimo ski, but to go uphill. And with that matching anodized blue binding on, the whole package is beautiful. It goes uphill with. I'm fortunate to be moderately fit compared to other people my age that ski tour with, so I've never really have a problem going uphill in the pack, in regards to how heavy my kit is. So a little bit more weight, which gives me the control to ski steep stuff on the way down. So I think if I had to choose, and people often say, because I love outdoor sports. I've climbed bunch of North Faces, bunch of big walls in the States, first ascents I've climbed on all 7 continents and been very fortunate, done first ascents in many of them. Punter level, nothing difficult, but done a few of the classic North Faces, done half dome in El Cap, so I've done some punter good stuff. And people sort of say, but then mountain bike across the Sahara, done a bunch of big mountain bike crossings, bunch of ski crossings, skied Antarctica, the Arctic. And people say, well, what would you do? What's the last sport you do? Is it Ironman or is it ski touring? And I think of all the outdoor stuff, I've got my parapente license. I love them all. I couldn't possibly choose. It would be impossible to choose a bit of kit or a sport. But if I absolutely had to choose only one at the end, what's that desert island disc, then I think it would be ski mountaineering, tough ski touring, technical ascents, alpine ascents, bringing, either hauling or carrying your skis, and then, difficult descents involving challenging steep skiing, rappelling, exploration in really, really remote areas with first ascents. That's the one I'd give up last of all of the sports and activities. And so my favorite bit of gear would have to be something that would facilitate that. So my Salomon N95 touring skis with my ATK bindings on.
What book would you advise somebody to read who wanted to have a successful career within the sports and outdoor industry?
Oh, golly gosh, that's interesting. But if I had to get a book, I think a technical book, it's very simplistic. But sometimes one forgets, if one's been in the industry, one's read everything for 30, 40 years, sometimes they forget that the simple stuff is still great stuff if you haven't read it. So you can do a lot worse than Covey. It's a cracking first effort into... And again, you can overcomplicate this stuff. You can do a 4-year MBA at Harvard in business, but the fundamentals are still the fundamentals. So I think you can do an awful lot worse than Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. Sometimes it's fun to read the stories, Just Do It, the story of Nike, the men and boys that played and run her, some of the great stories, the Isaac, what's his face, the Apple story, Steve Jobs' story, Walter Isaacson's. I love all of those. I think if I were to simply choose one, it would probably be the Covey one, because it's a really clean and simple starting point. But there's loads, the E-Myth, the Entrepreneurs. There's so many great things out there. I love reading. I absolutely love reading. Every night, I never ever, no matter what time I got in, bivouac, what I've read in ice caves, I've read on portal ledges, I've read on boats. I just read, and then I can't read. I'm listening to podcasts. So there's so much out there. It's fabulous.
What's the most valuable piece of advice you've ever received? I'm going to retire, and beyond that, actually, I'm going to completely step away from the outdoor industry.
Yeah.
What would be your last message to the industry?
Something along the lines of, don't forget you're so much more than just flogging shit. That it isn't about the lay pattern for this fleece, or the shell and the insulation and the mid and the base and all of the technical stuff and getting out of Everest and all of that. Of course it is there, but the Norwegians have got this lovely expression of air like luft laugh, so air something. Must drop that in later, but it's this deep expression of a connectedness to life and the outdoors and the environment and nature. And the outdoor industry is the closest we've got to an industry that can express an ownership or a stewardship or a promotional bringing together of that benefit, that we know the challenge we face on the climate crisis at the moment. We know the challenge we face on biodiversity. We know the challenge we face on physical activity, on mental health and emotional health in a digital world. The enormous challenges we're facing at the moment. And if there's one thing that can pull that together, I think it's that being physically active outdoors. And consequently, our industry have an inalienable necessity to promote the bigger picture of what our industry can stand for. That the thing that, particularly in this country, you need a pair of boots and something to keep you dry. It isn't the gear; it's what the gear facilitates you to do, and then in the doing of that, how much broader your perception of life, your value chain. Everything from how you interact with your friends and your family, and when you get to that moment, hopefully for me, skiing a black run when I'm 99 years old, but whatever point you get to that moment and you look back at a great life, then it won't be about the meetings you went to or the money you made or the EBITDA. It will be about the bigger things, and the outdoor industry has that opportunity to see those. I've climbed some epic, 24 hours plus on big alpine north faces, huge polar pools, absolutely exhausted, and you don't give a two hoots about anything about, can I breathe, can I drink, is there any food left, will I survive tonight without frostbite. It's so deeply fundamental. There's no room for bullshit. It's utterly authentic, and that authenticity, that cutting through the crap, is where our industry, perhaps its greatest legacy and its greatest message. And so I would just say, if I left that, sounds awfully pompous, doesn't no one want to hear what I've got to say, but if you did ask me to leave that message, it would be that don't forget we're greater than just the stuff we make. It's the message and the value that underlies our industry. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's not pompous at all. I think it's very inspiring. So last question. So the goal of this interview, or let's say the Sports and Outdoor Mentors platform, is to hopefully help people to benefit from experiences of people like yourself in their career path. So if you could share 3 pieces of advice for anybody that maybe is already in the sports and outdoor industry, is a leader or wants to become a leader within the industry, what would those 3 pieces of advice be?
Well, certainly the first one would be stick at it. It's a brilliant industry. I do remember many years ago, someone who worked at Rohan, we were talking about it 40 years ago, and he just said something about like, I'm not going to stay in this industry. There's no money in this industry. It's just a rinky-dink full of enthusiasts and amateurs. And I kind of got my back up at the time, to be frank. And I just thought, well, I think I can make money in this industry. And I haven't made as much as some, but I made enough. I'm very happy. And more importantly, that balance that we talked about earlier, as long as you've got food on the table and you're happy. So it's absolutely worth staying in. I think not only because it's a fabulous industry full of fabulous people and it sells more than just stuff. It's worth doing. You can make money. You can be very successful in it. You can absolutely make multi-million-pound businesses. We've not touched on that. I'm in business with John Dunn, the climber, and for 20 years now, we've got a fabulous series of 6 climbing walls. It's a great business that we've still got going, that John runs fantastically, as well as my other businesses in the past. So it isn't necessarily the easiest business in the world, but nobody told Phil Knight it would be easy. But what are they doing now? 36 billion. So yes. Do it. Don't be dispirited. It might not appear to be as easy initially, and there are an awful lot of difficult jobs to start off. If you're watching this and you're working on the shop floor in a JD Outdoors, then it might seem a million miles away. But it's really worth sticking at it. I think it's a lot of fun. It's a fabulous industry to be in. So that's certainly one of them. I don't know. I think balance, perhaps. If we're coming up with another one, don't forget why you got into the industry. I see people now who I used to run with or climb with, who don't anymore, and don't lose track, don't get, I'm one to say, don't get obsessed with stuff, don't get, so into the business side of it. That's all that you do it for. We do it for more than that. And I whatever it is, whether it's climbing a North Face or parapunting off the top of something steep in Chamonix, or just doing park run, but whatever your thing is, don't forget you got into the sports or outdoor because you probably loved sport or outdoor. So try and run the 2 side by side. So stay in it, persist in it. You can succeed in it, but don't forget that you love the other. And then perhaps I think there's a huge part of our life that is our work and how we make our money, how one pays the mortgage and pays the bills and facilitates what you want to do with your life. And then there is that part that is your sport or your physical activity or your passions. But perhaps the third one is family and your friends and your social life. And maybe there's a lovely fit. And only because you asked me 3, you've asked me 4, and I'm sure I've found a 4th. But it feels like they're the 3 core things in your life, maybe. And so we're back to balance. We're back to my yoga training, that you have to make the money. Don't forget to enjoy why you're making the money. But don't. And when I was training for Ironman World Championships, doing like 25, 30 hours a week, and my wife never saw me, that was probably a bit overboard on that side. When I was building mountain equipment, working 70, 80, 90 hours a week, and I'm divorced in my first marriage, that was probably overboard on that side of it. Now I've got Dora, and I'm fortunate that I've got a broader portfolio that I can balance. I love being able to play piano with in the morning, take her to school. So for me, perhaps we're back round to balance, and perhaps, yes, it's a fabulous industry, stay in it. Don't forget why you started in it, but don't forget whatever you do, that your family and your friends and your mental and emotional balance is absolutely as important as any of those other 2. So is that 3 things?
Well, I don't know if it is, but it's a perfect way to finish, because I think it's super important. And if you don't do that, then the other things, I would say, become pretty difficult to do. So Brilliant. Well, look, Andrew, we could have talked for much more because there are some things we only scratched the surface on, which I would have loved to go more deeper, but we're already a little bit over time. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for sharing. It's incredibly inspiring. And, you know, as somebody who initially worked within the UK outdoor industry and now, let's say, works more from a European perspective, you know, what you've been able to achieve at the OIA is amazing. So, you know, keep up the amazing work. I think I can speak on behalf of the industry that, I think we're all, you know, really happy to have you here.
It's absolutely a team. You know, I've got an incredible board of volunteer directors who are just brilliant, who give me their time, you know, completely. And then the team at MCS doing the background. So I'm just like the guy that shuffles all the pieces on the deck chairs, but on the deck. But do love it. And you know, to the industry who's watching, many thanks for all your support. You know, we'll keep doing what we can. And thank you, Dan. It's been a really enjoyable, thoroughly enjoyed the meeting. Cheers.
Thanks, Andrew. Take care. I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. We love to read your feedback, so please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks again for your support. See you soon, and don't forget to subscribe.